Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're talking about hair metal, specifically 80s hair metal, and maybe, is it as bad as some people kind of look back and think it is? There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlists we put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So growing up in the 80s, I loved a lot of that the 80s hair metal. But there was some that was pretty bad.
Yeah.
And then
that's true of any genre.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of my point is there is some really great stuff that came out of that subgenre in the 80s. And I think some people kind of like to point the finger at things like Poison and bands like that and Warrant as why that subgenre was bad or is bad.
The problem is that they're looking at radio friendly hits that were chosen by the record labels.
Yes.
And videos paid for by the record labels to sell the album to a wide variety of people without thinking that you're selling bubblegum.
Yeah.
Bubblegum songs.
And there were. If Warrant, for instance, you take Cherry Pie, that's a song that the band even hated. The band didn't want to create that. That was something that was pushed by the label for them to quickly throw on because they wanted one of those kind of bubblegum poppy kind of songs to push out to the market. And that's kind of what people like to point their finger at and say, well, this is why hair metal was so bad.
Yeah. But and that's, you go back and you look, Poison, we mentioned Poison, on their Flesh and Bone album, the first single off that, at least the first one I knew of, was Unskinny Bob.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a terrible song. The band hates that song. And that's actually a really good album. There's a lot of good, strong songs
that was
on that.
1990 when that came out?
The early 1990, yeah.
So, that was kind of I think music by 1990 was almost in this transition period. Yeah. And some of those bands saw the writing on the wall. And I think we're kind of trying to move into a little bit more of a serious area with their music. And I think Poison did that with Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, because it's a great album. There's a lot of good songs on that album. Unskinny Bob is not one of them. Yeah. But that's the one that was out and about and everyone was hearing all the time.
That's the one song that people attach to that album.
Exactly. And then, like you said, Cherry Pie's another one. But I don't know. I mean,
there are so many bands that created some really, really great music in the 80s that were part of that hair metal scene. People forget that Guns N' Roses was kind of lumped into that also.
I don't think they were, but you're right. They were lumped.
They shouldn't have been, because I never considered them a hair metal band. But when the video came out for Welcome to the Jungle, and Axl with his big hair and all that, I think that's kind of where some of that kind of fed into. But they were never a hair metal band.
Not really, no. And I would even say Sweet Child of Mine, as elaborate as that song is, because the guitar work on that song is fantastic. Above and beyond a lot of even what their contemporaries were doing. But it still kind of falls into that. That's not a bubblegum song, but it was sent out as a bubblegum song. Yeah. It was sent out as a radio-friendly hit.
It was just one of those ballads that every 80s album had some kind of ballad.
And to be fair, 80s metal, 80s hair metal specifically, had some of the best ballads ever.
Oh, absolutely.
Those poppy songs aside, their ballads were fantastic in the 80s.
I know Def Leppard gets lumped into 80s hair metal because Hysteria was kind of an 80s hair metal album.
It was, yeah.
But Def Leppard started out as something very, very, very different. If you listen to On Through the Night, if you listen to High and Dry, Pyromania, maybe Pyromania was starting to kind of touch on some of that hair metal stuff. But at least with High and Dry, On Through the Night, very different, very harder. There was definitely a different edge.
They were a rock band.
They were rock bands, yes. Yeah. But there was also a bunch of great 80s hair metal. Outside of them, you had bands like Motley Crue, which, say what you will about Motley Crue. The first couple of albums were really good. And then once they kind of started getting towards Dr. Feelgood, I feel like I think once Theater of Pain came out,
When it started good. Yeah, they stopped doing the makeup, and I'm not saying that is a bad thing because that makeup was terrible. But they stopped doing the makeup, and I don't know what if they were trying to be serious. Musically they didn't really change that much, but they changed enough. But you had songs like Home Sweet Home, which is a very serious song that I don't think anyone in the band actually liked either. Yeah. But it's a good song. It's not my favorite of theirs.
Their music took a different tone, I think, later into their career.
For me, Motley Crue exists from Too Fast for Love to Dr. Feelgood, and I think Dr. Feelgood was a good album to go out on, in my opinion. It should have been their last album.
I like the John Corabi album, but I'm in the minority.
Right, but you could argue that's not kind of really a Motley Crue album. It's more of a something else with Motley Crue band members. You know, kind of like Plus 44 or plus 44, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got 2 of the 3 members of Blink in it, but it's not Blink.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see.
I can kind of see
with the Corabi album, but I didn't like Theater of Pain, and I don't like Girls, Girls, Girls. So really, as much, I don't. Those are albums I could never really go back and listen to that much, unless it was really bored and wanted something different. But Dr. Feelgood is a great album. So like I said, it's a good album to go out on.
Yeah.
And that to me is more on par with what Guns N' Roses was doing. It was kind of more moving away from the hair metal a little bit. Maybe.
Well, yeah. I don't think, like I said earlier, I don't think Guns N' Roses should have ever been lumped into that category.
Right.
They had I think a kind of harder edge. And like I said, if you look at the rest of the members of the band, none of them looked like they belonged in a hair metal band, other than Axl
in that one video.
In that one video,
and a couple of publicity shots and stuff like that. But there's also there was a trend of like 70s rockers doing hair metal-esque things, like Ozzy. I mean, his first couple albums, not really hair metal, but once you get into like Ultimate Sin and No Rest for the Wicked,
I kind of see some of that.
It's kind of hair metal-y because he had the hairspray hair, and
you know,
he was doing kind of the same thing. Alice Cooper, same thing. 2 albums, Constrictor and Raise Your Fist and Yell, very kind of hair metal. More metal than hair, but still.
Yeah, I guess I kind of have a hard time seeing either one of those as like
hair metal
artists.
Right. But they were. I call those their hair metal albums because it was in that same time period, and they were doing a lot of the same things that the hair metal bands are doing. Yeah.
But he had some really great 80s hair metal also. Winger was doing some great stuff with a couple of their albums. Bon Jovi, I love Slippery When Wet. Yeah. That was I think kind of a big hair metal.
They kind of got too far into it, I think. By New Jersey, it was still a good album, but if you look again, it's like you said about Def Leppard. Those first couple albums, they're self-titled. I can't remember, Fahrenheit something. It was the name of their second album, and then Slippery When Wet. Those are kind of hair metal. They fall into that category, but they were a little heavier. They were rockier. New Jersey was kind of pushing the boundaries, but then after that, it's just they don't.
I think with New Jersey, they got almost like
too big for themselves.
Yeah, almost a little too like mainstream. I think. Even though it's not a great way to put it, but you know, I think they tried to recapture some of the more popular stuff that they did on Slippery When Wet, and they did like too much of it on New Jersey.
A little bit.
I think New Jersey is still a good album.
Still a good album, yeah.
But there's even some smaller bands like Faster Pussycat, White Lion, LA Guns, smaller bands that did some really great stuff that I think has kind of largely been forgotten about from that scene. I think a lot of people, like I said, the people that really kind of point their finger at hair metal being a bad thing really focus too much on kind of that like bubblegummy kind of poppy kind of stuff.
And the ballads, which again, I still like the ballads.
Yeah, but like I said, those smaller bands, I think, were almost kind of like the heart of a lot of that 80s hair metal stuff that, even 30, 40 years later is still really good music.
I think it could probably look at it like this. So, and this was even true then. So you had these bands that were hair metal, but they weren't metal like metal. And they were still too metal for like most of the mainstream, even though it was kind of mainstream. So they were kind of in this weird
like in between
zone, yeah, that in retrospect, I mean, like I said, they were popular, but in retrospect you look back and they're like, well, that's not metal.
So what you're saying is
too metal,
they're not metal enough for metal,
right?
And they're too metal for pop.
Yes, exactly.
So they're like in the neutral zone.
Well, which probably at the time is what, and at the time is kind of what kept them going, but again, in retrospect, when you look back, you're like, well, that's that the hair and the the leather and everything just seems so
Fake?
so clownish
Yeah.
in retrospect. But if you look at the music, if you take the music by itself, take the images out, and just listen to the music, there's a lot to like there, and there's a lot to be had, I think, in the broad spectrum. Take Cinderella.
Yeah.
The
Another great
Night
one.
Songs. That album is very, very deep for a hair metal band to do. And that kind of gets lost in the whole.
Yeah.
That cover is, basically a snapshot of an entire era of music, of what we're talking about, hair metal.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think about hair metal. Because like I said, I think there's some really great underrated stuff that happened in the 80s that, like I said, largely kind of goes unnoticed today. That even though you're going back and listening to that stuff, 30, 35 years later, still kind of holds up in 2023. But people like to point their finger at it and laugh at some of the goofy stuff, and like you said, Ian, some of the makeup and costumes and stuff, some of the like over the top outlandish stuff that some of the bands did back then maybe overshadowed a lot of the great music. But let us know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us the old thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and that's all I got. Until next time,
Talk to y'all later.
keep on spinning. Peace.